And in the beginning, what was the first thing that you noticed that he was disrespectful to you personally?
I don't remember the first. I had to go back to my log and look at like the first thing I logged and wrote down, but I just remember him being defiant all the time.
All right, joining me as my special guest for this segment, psychotherapist and author of Minds of Mass Killers, Shavaun Scott. Also with us, trial attorney and family law attorney Lexi Rigdon and federal executive clemency attorney Tammy Allison. All right, Shavaun, thank you again for being with me tonight. Truly appreciate it. Hopefully you can shed some light on this. You've been listening to the testimony, paying attention to what's been going on in this case. Mind-boggling. So many people recognized all of these very serious issues. They seem to oscillate, get worse at times, maybe get better at other times. Anything that you've noticed regarding the testimony about Nikolas Cruz and the treatments that he was receiving, what has jumped out to you as someone who is learned in this area?
The most dramatic thing that I'm noticing is that there's a striking lack of coordination of care. He was receiving services from many different providers, but it seems at this point none of those providers were talking, and none of them had the information that would have been necessary to develop a really competent and effective treatment plan. If you don't have an excellent assessment, which would include information from everyone, you're not going to be doing the right kinds of treatment. And I think this is a systemic failure in that people weren't talking to each other. The psychiatrist didn't talk to the school. Sometimes even in the school, the teachers didn't have communication with the counselor. The mother was often relied on for reporting to the psychiatrist, and the mother often downplayed things. So nobody was working together. And because of that, things were missed, particularly after middle school, the escalation of violence and obsession about killing.
Now, when we talk about standard of care and dealing with these types of situations, what you're talking about, this communication, would that be considered the standard of care? Would that have been the right way to go? And would that have changed the results somewhat?
I firmly believe that this could have been prevented if everybody had had all the information about he was telegraphing for years his intent to commit a mass shooting. And if everyone had had that information and had a better diagnosis on what was going on with him, I think treatment could have been far more effective. And I think, in so many of these mass shootings, if we pay attention to the red flags and everybody is on the same page and we're targeting the right problems and the right behavior, so often we were hearing that he had ADHD. There was so much more going on than ADHD. 9% of the population has ADHD. He was in a different category. He may have had ADHD, but there were layers of neurodevelopmental problems with him.
Let me bring back in Lexi and Tammy. And Tammy, I'll start with you. Today we heard testimony regarding, he was in the 7th grade, regarding what I believe was a little bit of an escalation into that area where we're talking about he was more violent, more menacing, his drawings more violent, depicting violent things, talking about guns, things of that nature. Thought it was an important day for the defense because you can begin to see in the 7th grade when I think folks were saying, this was about attention, but I think in the 7th grade, I think it's fair to say that type of thinking is something that perhaps a kid that age doesn't have control over.
Michael, I don't know. I don't know if a kid has control over it or not, but what we do know is based off of the testimony, he has been under the care of various healthcare officials. And like we stated earlier, they weren't communicating with each other. So what's normal, what's not normal for somebody in 7th grade? What we do know is what's not normal is to shoot up a school and kill 17 people. So whether they communicated with each other or not, if anything, with the defense bringing out this testimony, in my opinion, it's more damaging because it shows that all of these people who had a responsibility to protect the children, to protect the community, failed the children and the community and the victims of this horrendous mass shooting because they did not step up and do something. They knew this boy was special acting, and they could have done something to prevent this from happening. We heard testimony about his prenatal vitamins being alcohol and whatever. There's a lot of people whose prenatal vitamins was cracked, okay? And you don't see them shooting up the place.
Yeah,
That part.
fair enough. Now, but Lexi, I wonder, I think at least an undercurrent of the defense's case is this idea that the system, society failed this kid. I thought today's testimony helped in that direction. Your thoughts?
Well, society unfortunately fails a lot of kids and a lot of adults. And as she just said so eloquently, they don't go and then shoot up a school because of it. And so I kind of agree with what was said, which is that, all of this defense testimony is showing just how many people actually did try to help him. I realize it wasn't effective and they weren't necessarily coordinated enough, but there are a lot of kids that don't get any help and they don't end up doing this. And so I'm not sure how much it's gonna help him when you actually see what a long-standing issue this was. This isn't a kid who at 19 snapped. This is somebody who has been violent and hateful and full of rage for years and years and years. And so if I was sitting on that panel, that would have an impact on me.
Shavaun, this is a perfect time to bring you back in because this is an argument that we hear all the time, that other kids subjected to similar situations, similar problems, don't act out in the way that Nikolas Cruz did. You study mass killers. What's the difference here? What makes Nikolas Cruz the one that actually went ahead with acting out on these thoughts and ideas he had?
The piece that I see that has been missed is that a primary focus of treatment, at least from middle school on, should have been the conduct disorder. And conduct disorder puts him in a very different category. If a minor has very strong antisocial traits, they're violent, they're aggressive, they seem to have no conscience, they're cruel, they attack people, threaten people, bully people, hurt animals, all these things that he did. He even in elementary school was obsessed with violence, death, and killing. So this puts him in a different category. And yes, lots of kids lose a parent, lots of kids have prenatal drug and alcohol exposure, lots of kids don't get adequate services or any services at all. So he did have many privileges, but there was a layer here which we can kind of tie in the concept of psychopathy. He is different. And I think the defense has made a very good case about the vulnerabilities. He did have vulnerabilities, things that were of no fault of his own, but there was something else going on. And this is where the prosecution is pointing out his manipulative behavior, his ability to control himself when he worked at the dollar store or when there were male teachers around. He behaved better than he did when there were female teachers around because he knew he could bully them. So I think this gets into the need for good diagnostic clarity because yes, there are some things about him. He knew what he was doing. He planned for months. He had talked about killing for years. And if we had been more focused on that aspect and treating those aspects of his personality, including the obsessions with guns and killing, and then there's the enabling mother, the mother who knew so much about him, but she still bought him guns and still facilitated the purchase of the AR-15.
Shavaun, hold on.
So a lot went wrong.
I'm sorry to cut you off because I have one more question. I only have a couple seconds left. So at the end of the day, is it possible, we see he's still acting out in prison, he had an issue with a prison guard, physical violence, he's still making these drawings, he's 23 years old at this point. Can he be helped? Is this someone who there's still hope for?
I think very clearly this is a person who would never be safe in society. His brain is set at this point. His behavior is set. He, with very strict behavioral controls that you would find in prison, he could probably adapt and function reasonably well. But is he safe out in the world among the rest of us? No, he never will be.
Yeah, and there's no question he's never going to see, the world. I'm just saying as far as just him and getting him to a point where he can function even in that prison environment where he seems to be having trouble as it is. All right, Shavaun, Tammy, Lexi, please all stand by. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I do have to take a break now. I'm being told I got to go. We'll be back in just a second. Now, you're all going to be returning. Coming up next, it is our Talkback segment, folks. And in the estranged husband kidnapping trial, the bizarre behavior of the defendant has been front and center. So today we asked you if you think his actions are a result of some form of mental illness or simply an attempt to keep control over his family. Your responses next. Trevor Summers is charged with the violent kidnapping and attempted murder of his ex-wife. Prosecutors allege Trevor broke into Mathewson's house where he kidnapped her and tied her up. Summers fired his attorney mid-trial to represent himself and cross-examine his ex-wife and 2 of his 5 children, who all testified for the state.
You did push me, you did hold me down, you did tie me up, you did attack me, and you did break into my home when I was sleeping. You raped me.
So for today's Talkback question, we wanted to know, does this trial involve a descent into mental illness or a defendant still desperately trying to control his family? Still with me, psychotherapist and author of Minds of Mass Killers, Shavaun Scott, also trial and family law attorney Lexi Rigdon, and federal executive clemency attorney Tammy Allison. All right, guys, let's get to our first comment. It comes from Lisa. Lisa says that the cross of the victim was hard to watch. That disgusting excuse of a human being is still abusing his wife and the kids. How can they allow the attacker to question the victim? I get it's the law, but it should be changed. That is so wrong. Lexi, I'll go to you because you know what? I understand the law, I understand the Constitution, but gosh, it did feel wrong. Your thoughts on what, he was almost making a mockery of the system.
I mean, it does feel wrong and it's not right. And she's essentially being re-victimized. And I think he wanted to have his day in court in front of her and be able to basically force her to be answering those questions because she has to. But as we all know, the law's not perfect. We see that here all the time with the wrong verdicts. I mean, bad juries. The law's not perfect. He's allowed to act as his own attorney. This is a profession where you can't be your own surgeon, but you can be your own attorney. And so that's comes with the good and the bad for that.
Yeah, no doubt. The Constitution allows you the right to confront witnesses. This took it to a whole new level, that's for sure. Our next comment comes from Mary Lou. Mary Lou says, could be both. Narcissistic behavior is a personality disorder, not mental illness. But being denied what he wanted may have developed into psychotic behavior. He seemed out of touch with reality. He convinced himself he did nothing wrong. And Shavaun, I've got to bring you in on this one. I'll tell you, that sounds like someone who has some experience in the sort of psychology of things. Your thoughts on what this guy did? We see this so often. You know, guys or even women who are involved in custody battles, or the wives wants to leave the relationship or husband wants to leave, leads to this odd behavior, out of character behavior. What are we seeing?
Well, normally in these kind of cases, it's almost always not mental illness. It's personality pathology, and a mental illness is something that happens to you. It happens to your brain, something like schizophrenia that can be fixed with medication. Personality problem or personality disorder, I haven't talked with this man, so I can't say specifically what it would be, but certainly narcissism and psychopathy, a blend of those things would be possible. The urge to dominate, to have power, to have control, and to descend into really bizarre, aggressive behavior because of that. So it's most likely personality disorder stuff. We call it the cluster B personality disorders, and these people can be very dangerous.
Yeah, they're dangerous partly because there really didn't seem to be, I think there was some abuse in the relationship, but nothing that portended something like this. All right, our next comment comes from Mala. Mala says, and you can bet that he will say he's mentally disturbed. It's a game. All criminals play. Tammy, that's exactly what it feels like. I think from the time he was being interviewed, we saw some of that today. He was interviewed by police while in the hospital. He kind of scratched his neck to make believe he wanted to commit suicide. I think it was all part of a big game for him.
It's gross, Michael. Listen,
yes.
This was a lot. The cross-examination was cringy at best. The fact that he's scratching his neck, it's just too much. It's too much. I don't know if it's mental illness, if it's whatever it is, it's not right. It's wrong. And I just, feel for the victims, his former wife and their children, because this is not okay. And I understand He has a constitutional right to defend himself. He has a constitutional right to face his accused. But at the same time, he fired his lawyer in the middle of all of this, and the judge has to sign off on the attorney withdrawing from representation. And that's something that we haven't really talked about, the judge and him allowing the attorney to withdraw and this defendant to represent himself. Because sometimes they don't allow that to happen whenever they're in the middle of a trial.
Yeah, and you know, it was allowed in this case. It really made a mockery of things. I think he even hurt himself. I think there was some room to maybe get off on the top charge of attempted murder with an abandonment claim. Not even sure that would have worked with a real attorney, but certainly he would have more of a chance. All right. Well, thanks to Shavaun Scott, Lexi Rigdon, Tammy Allison for being with us tonight. Truly appreciate all of you guys. Great insights. Really helped me understand some things. So thank you very much for that. You guys have a great evening. Coming up next, folks, we're going to review the 3 things we've learned today in the cases that we've been covering here on Coast to Coast on Court TV Live. Keep it right here on your front row seat to justice.
44823.
Well, today has been another busy day here on Court TV Live, and here are 3 things that we've learned. First, jurors went on a second jury viewing in the Ohio family massacre trial. They visited the trailers where the alleged murders took place. Now, the trailers were moved to a secure county lot about 90 days after the murders due to concerns over possible evidence tampering. The trailers actually remain in the same condition they were after the murders. And second, the judge in the Wagner case ruled he is going to allow prosecutors to introduce at trial social media messages by victim Hannah Roden, where she talked about the bitter custody battle that prosecutors claim is the motive for this massacre. And third, we heard from one of Nikolas Cruz's former middle school teachers who testified that she felt she was in physical danger with Cruz in her class.
Did Mr. Cruz's behavior scare you?
At times, yes.
Do you know if he scared the other students?
I believe at times he did, yes.
All right, that's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Michael Ayala. Ahead a little later, tune into Closing Argument. Vinnie Politan takes a look at new developments in the Delphi murder investigation. But up next, Judgment of the Hollywood Stalker with Ashley Banfield.